is the Clinks workshop on the legal implications of the voluntary sector of subcontracting under TR. My name is Louise Garner. I'm the project manager for the Legal Support Project, which we're doing in collaboration with Russell Cook Solicitors. This is Jane from Russell Cook. The project will be providing a whole range of resources. So on your chair, you will have noticed that we've given you half a tree. So you'll have the guide to subcontracting, which came out this week in its first version. This is a guide to some of the legal implications around subcontracting using the industry standard partnering agreement. We've also given you a copy of that said agreement, which is currently in draft form, and then the explanatory guide. And then in your packs, you've got some more resources and some printouts for the day. So I hope that's useful. Just a bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if you do hear a fire alarm, there's a fire exit out through these doors or back through the building. Toilets are at the end of the room. We're also filming this session because we want to make it available to people in Cornwall who can't get to any of the sessions in Exeter at the moment without going for 4 hours on a train, and some other places where people haven't been able to get to. So if you have any objections to any of the filming, then please let us know. But otherwise it will be filmed and available on our website in a couple of weeks' time. We're going to be running workshops around the country. So we'll be running workshops in Manchester and Exeter, Birmingham and York, and then back in London on the 21st. We've also just made an agreement with Akivo to extend their negotiation skills workshops. So we'll be running a negotiation skills workshop on March 21st in the afternoon, if anybody wants to book onto that one. And then we're also going to be running another unit costing and impact measurement at a date to be agreed at the end of March. So if anybody's interested in that, then let us know. We have our helpline is opening on Tuesday, and that's to be available to anybody who wants to ask about subcontracting issues or how to get involved in the TR process. And it'll also be a triage service so that we'll be able to offer free legal advice for small and medium organisations who are getting involved in negotiations with our partners through Russell Cook and also our legal partners around the country. And we have Richard here from DWF, Simon from Morgan Collins. So yes, if you need further legal advice, then do phone the helpline. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have James Sinclair Taylor, who's the partner in Russell Cook, Ellie Cumbo, who's the policy manager at Clinks, and we'll also be hearing from David Mears, partner at Russell Cook, and Jane Pendry at the back over there, who's going to talk about 2P and HR a bit later on. We're going to run the session as the overview and then looking at various legal implications, and we'll run question and answers after each presentation, so you get a chance to ask questions. It's quite a lot of information. I hope that helps. We're going to have a break about 11:15, so if you do want to ask any questions, then come and grab me. Okay, I'm going to hand now over to Ellie, who's going to talk about an overview of TR.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me if I just talk like this? Excellent. As mentioned then, I'm the manager of the policy team at Clinks. Our role is to keep our members up to date with government thinking and, more importantly, government plans like transforming rehabilitation. And then the other half of our role is to communicate back to government in the form of consultations, meetings and so on in order to advocate for the sector and ensure that its concerns are flagged. I'm just going to whiz through the basics of transforming rehabilitation because I'm largely assuming that everybody is pretty much aware of the basics, but there will be time for a few questions at the end if there's anything I've not covered. But I think for most people in the room, not a lot of the next few minutes will be new, which is a nice gentle introduction for you because obviously the legal stuff does get quite complicated. Does this work? Oh, right.
Nope.
Techno fail. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So this was really the initial seeds of transforming rehabilitation as early as the coalition agreement documentation in 2010. So people think of it as being Chris Grayling's own personal plan, and obviously in a lot of ways it is, but as early as 2010 there was a plan to bring in independent providers and also to look at payment by results. That was discussed in other areas of public service reform at the time. I think what we can safely say is that Chris Grayling has championed that for the justice sector. But these were the early signs that change was coming. And then, of course, people will be aware that the main document still to refer to that announces the government's plans is called Transforming Rehabilitation, a Strategy for Reform. So going through the very key features then of transforming rehabilitation, the main reason why we're all here is because the management of low and medium risk offenders is going to be put out to competition. So new independent providers will be taking those over. I'll come to the timelines later, but it's happening fairly quickly. And people will probably be aware that we already have the list then of 30 tier ones, as they're known, so that the 30 big providers who are going to be taking on the lead contracts, or who are potentially going to be taking on the lead contracts, those 30 have passed the initial stage. And will now be going through the next stage until we find out who actually gets awarded the contract in each area. The difference with high-risk offenders is that they are staying in the public sector, but that a new National Probation Service is going to be set up to manage them, and that National Probation Service will also be responsible for the public protection aspects of the new landscape, so they'll be doing risk assessment and so on. And then it's also about changes to prisons, so people will hopefully know about resettlement prisons. We now have the full list of resettlement prisons. So initially we had the 71 male prisons. We now know that all women's prisons are also going to be resettlement prisons. So that the list is available on the government website. We won't focus too much on what's actually going to happen in resettlement prisons because obviously that has yet to be revealed. But if people do have questions that are specific to prisons, we'll try and endeavour to answer those too. Second half of the key features. The first stage is obviously something that actually was discussed under the last government. So again, it's not completely new, but it is this government that's forging ahead with it, and it is that they're going to open out supervision to people who are completing custodial sentences of under 12 months. Obviously, that's going to cost a lot of money. That cost is going to be met by the efficiencies that the government hopes to make in contracting probation services out to largely the private sector. And later, of course, there's a hope that this will drive down reoffending and that itself will also deliver cost savings. We won't talk in too much detail about payment by results today because that is all to be negotiated for, is I think what James is going to explain to you. If people do have questions about payment by results, again, I will endeavour to answer them, but what I will say at the outset is that the government has now published its overview of what the payment mechanism will look like, and that's available on their website. Please do bear in mind that the payment mechanism is written to apply to the Tier 1 organisations, so the lead organisations. How it gets passed down the supply chain is all about what you negotiate. So when you do look at it, please do bear that in mind. We know there's been some misunderstanding about that. It isn't the case that when you read that payment mechanism overview that will necessarily apply to you. So the key documents for people that do want to go away and absorb a bit more detail, if you haven't already, TR, A Strategy for Reform, was the government's response to everything that was put in during the consultation period. So they did make a few changes at that stage. They were initially thinking about having just 16 contract package area. They decided on the basis of the consultation responses to increase that to 21. So that's an example of something that did change. But that does now set out the finalised plans and is worth referring back to, not just for their vision, but for the reasons behind it. The second document that's most important was published fairly recently as part of the current stage of the competition, which is called the Invitation to Negotiate stage, and it's called the Target Operating Model. A version of this was published in September. There is a fairly detailed update in the most recent version of that. So make sure you're looking at the Tom 2, as we call it, if you're looking for that online. It is all available both on the government's website, but also on the Clinks website. And we do have a dedicated page where we attempt to keep on top of and keep our members up to date with all the changes, because there are many and they are frequent in the Transforming Rehabilitation competition. So that's the page. Hopefully people have looked at that before, but do make a note of it. There are links to all the main documents, and of course to Clinks' own briefings and a blog series that we also wrote trying to explore some of the things that we don't know yet. So hopefully that's a useful set of resources for anybody that's either considering getting into Transforming Rehabilitation or is already on the way. So coming on to the details of the new providers, and partly this is about explaining terminology really. So there are 21 contracts, as we said, for the new services, and they will correspond to 21 contract package areas, CPAs, obviously the TLA, the three-letter acronym for those. So when you hear CPA, we're talking about the area. It's important to note then that these are new geographical boundaries, so they don't neatly correspond to a police force area or a Crown Prosecution Service area. There are some cases where there are actually as many as 4 police force areas in one contract package area. So there will be new geographical boundaries for you to negotiate if you are considering getting into one of these contracts. One thing I actually forgot to add in here was another TLA, three-letter acronym, community rehabilitation companies. So those are the new entities that will be formed when the lead bidders take over from Probation Trust. So there will be 21 contract package areas, and they will be under the control of 21 community rehabilitation companies. So CPAs, CRCs are the key acronyms to have in your head. And just to throw a bit more complexity in for you, when we talk about the different levels of new service providers, the tier ones, that refers to at the moment 30, but eventually 21 prime lead contractors. In another competition, they would be called prime. The MOJ is very keen that we call them tier ones in this competition. Below that level, you'll have tier twos. Those are likely to have some, hopefully many, voluntary sector participants. And then tier threes are going to be small, perhaps community-based voluntary sector organisations, and they will have less responsibility and their contracts will look slightly different, but James will come on to the detail of those. One thing to just emphasise at this point is that there is no very clear distinction available between tier 2 and 3, and we have asked for it. It doesn't exist because it's largely to do with size. So tier 2s are likely to be taking on contracts directly with tier 1s that will probably look like you would expect them to look like for a sort of a subcontractor in this kind of competition. Tier 3s are going to be much smaller, much more community-based, and have far more question marks attached as to what those contracts will look like. Moving on to the map. Hopefully people are aware of this. This is available and was available as far back as the government's strategy for reform. So these are the 21 contract package areas. That document's a good one to have if you're still at the stage where you're considering where might be suitable for you to enter this competition. There's another one coming up that is possibly a little bit less user-friendly. People will also be aware that there is a document doing the rounds which allocates, from the list of the 30 potential Tier 1 bidders, that allocates them by contract package area. That document's in the public domain but hasn't been officially released by the MOJ. So just to say that we have no reason to think that's not accurate, but just to warn you that as yet the MOJ haven't put that information into the public domain. Oh, right, okay. We think it might be on there at some point, so you will be seeing it today. This document, this diagram, up to you whether or not you find this useful. I consider this really complicated. Essentially, what I've been told to tell you is please ignore that half. That's the public sector, that's going to be the National Probation Service, the high-risk offenders. That doesn't really apply to anybody in this room at this stage. This is what's interesting. So there are these 21 new community rehabilitation companies, CRCs, in the CPAs. Here's Tier 2 and here's Tier 3. So maybe just focus on this half of the diagram for now. That one might be, if you find that useful, it might be worth printing out and pinning to the wall, because it does just help to keep things in your mind. That's the timeline, which has shifted around very slightly, but obviously the thing that is very unlikely to shift is the April 2015 date, because it's obviously very important to the government that this is all in place by the time of the election. We do already have a pledge on the table that it's worth being aware of, that the Labour Party, if they win the next election, will look at whether or not they can undo these contracts. They don't support this. That just is worth bearing in mind. Whether or not it's likely that they're going to be able to unpick these contracts is obviously a different question. But that's why the government is very much intending to move ahead with this so that it's all in place by April. The stage that we're at now then is the invitation to negotiate period, which closes in July, August. So fairly quickly after that, in government terms, we ought to know who's actually been awarded each of the contracts. So we hope by the end of the year to know who the final 21 are, who's in each area. Sorry, was there a question?
Can I just check, are these slides going to be shared around?
I think, yeah.
Oh, sorry, we didn't print these slides out because they just didn't work in little tiny slides. So, but we will have them up on the website.
Yes, as if by magic. Here is the not dodgy diagram. I won't call it that, but just with that caveat that it hasn't yet been shared officially. This is who we think is bidding in each. Well, really pretty much is bidding in each contract package area. Again, this will be sent round with the presentation. So for those of you who want to study this in more detail, you'll have that opportunity. Perhaps I can leave it up at some point.
I've got some that people can take away with them if they want.
There we go.
It hasn't been. What's happened is that it hasn't been. We think it's been released to tier ones and it's been leaked through a blog site. And we've asked the MOJ if they can confirm it, and they have said that they confirm that it is available, but they won't confirm the details. So we're making details available with that caveat.
With that caveat, yes, thank you. Right, I just want to finish off.
Can you go back one slide?
Sure, yeah.
And one more. June 2014, new CRCs become fully operational. How does that link into the contract?
If we leave questions to the end, just so I can get through the presentation, but hold on to that one, it's a good one. I'll just talk really briefly about the principles that are supposed to underline how Tier 1s subcontract with our sector, but in a general sense as well. So when the initial strategy reform, which was the government's outline of their plans, was published last year, they were very clear, and I think really we can read between the lines that they were absorbing the lessons of the work programme, that they needed to make sure that subcontracting was governed in a way that was a bit more rigorous perhaps than it had been in the past, and that was fair to the voluntary sector in particular. So they published, when the competition formally opened in September, a set of market stewardship principles, and these are they. So they are very headline and were designed to be. These are the principles that are supposed to govern the future of subcontracting. So appropriate management of risk, alignment of ethos, i.e. it's important for each provider in the chain to know what's important to each other. I think that's particularly meant to be a sort of a code to the voluntary sector, that they understood the voluntary sector has its own ethos. Visibility across the supply chain, so that's sort of really the transparency point. Reward and recognition of good performance, obviously. Risk is important, but so is the idea that people who are going to take that risk actually do get a reward for it if they're successful. And then application of the principles of the Compact. Hopefully everybody in the room is familiar with the Compact, which is designed to preserve the independence of the sector when entering these government contracts. So that's what we've got in terms of the aims of how the industry standard partnering agreement and the whole process of subcontracting will work. It's not a guarantee that it does work, it's what it's aiming to achieve. Oh, and I meant to say, we were told that it would be embedded in the contract documentation. That's quite a strong word. It should be embedded, it shouldn't just be airy-fairy and unconnected. Which brings us on to the ISPA. It's important to bear in mind about the ISPA that it doesn't just apply to transforming rehabilitation and wasn't designed just for this competition. It is meant to govern all future subcontracting relationships that come under the responsibility of the MOJ. However, obviously, its first real trial is a pretty big one. It's going to be used for transforming rehabilitation. It is likely to reflect the agreements that Tier 1s are signing with the government. And it's important to bear in mind that its main governing principle, and James will say a lot more about this, is to make things transparent. So what it's aiming to do is to ensure that contracting partners know what they're signing up to. That's its primary goal. It's currently in draft form. That's also important to bear in mind. So it was out to consultation until the 20th of February. We don't yet have the final version. As I said about the original transforming rehabilitation proposals, there were changes that were made following consultation, so there may be changes that are made for the final version, but obviously what we have to do is give you the information about the version that we've got, and we're not expecting drastic or very significant changes. But that's another caveat that you need to be aware of. It is not a complete contract. There are large sections of it, if you've had a chance to look at it, that are blank, and that is because it's essentially for the contracting partners to fill in. So it's a framework. It's not what your final contract is going to look like. It's a starting point, and then effectively you negotiate the rest. And the most important thing probably that I'm going to say, and hopefully everybody knows this already, The ISPA protections only apply to people who have registered with the Ministry of Justice. So if you haven't yet registered, and I'm about to come onto the slide, in fact I will come onto the slide that explains how to do that, please do that. It doesn't commit you to anything. If you're still thinking about whether or not this is for you, this doesn't commit you. But if you don't get onto this list, then any contracts that you do form will not be covered by the ISPA, as far as we know.
Is this the same list as you previously were notified of and we registered on like months ago?
Well,
it's a new list.
That's a fair question, because there's been at least another procedure. There was the prior information notice, which people originally signed up to. That was just about getting the notifications. I don't think that was necessarily very clear at the time, but if you signed the prior information notice, all you got from that was information. In terms of it actually registering you formally in order to qualify for the protections of the ISPA, it does need to be this registration process. When you say months ago, that opened in September, but this process opened in September. So if you've done this one, that one, it's the same one.
Okay.
If you aren't sure, please do check that you've signed up to the right thing. And that's everything that I'm going to say as an overview, apart from any questions that you've got where things need a bit of clarification. So how much time have we got for questions, please?
Oh, about none. We'll be very quiet, very quick questions. We'll take 2 or 3 quick questions if we may.
Yeah,
And
you
we've
had
got
one.
somebody with a roving mic.
There was this gentleman here asking a
Somebody over
question.
here, yes. Could you just say who you are and where you're from, and then
My friend's Wellsbeck President, there was a date where the CRCs were going to be up and running or something. There was a date when the
Operational, yeah.
contract was going to be in place. And what my question is, what the impact on the situation, the current situation, when is it going to alter sort of dramatically?
Okay, well, tell me if I'm answering the question. The CRCs are being set up now. So that's reallocating probation staff, winding down probation trusts. So the 21 CRCs, which are MOJ owned now, will be set up and in place within all of them in the next few weeks. Then what effectively happens is that they're sold to the successful bidders at the end of the year. So and they take on the CRCs, but the CRCs as legal entities are pre-existing, will be pre-existing by the time that the new bidders know that they've won. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, in terms of function, from the prior function and the future function, what change will happen in June 2014? Is there any ending of certain capabilities? Because we haven't yet had any description of what the function's going to be of these organisations yet.
No,
Or is it going to
the
be
change is
made out?
geographical.
Just geographical.
It's pretty,
Every
yeah, it's just,
function will
yeah.
continue. It's just been remanaged.
They're essentially just probation companies instead of probation trusts, but they're still MOJ owned, and then they move.
Will the NPS not be hived off from that in June, or does that
Can we just-
remain the same?
So the question was whether the NPS will separate in June.
I don't know what the dates are for the National Probation Service. I think that's as far as we know, it's coming later. We don't have any news on it at the moment. But I
So
don't know
the
what
high-risk cases will still remain with the CRCs?
for the time being. Yeah.
My understanding is that any contracts which currently are with the probation trust will novate across and move straight across to CRCs, so that there won't be any change, there shouldn't be any change in terms of delivery immediately. And then as the tier 1 bidders come on board and those contracts finish, then the delivery mechanisms will change. Does that help?
There was one over there, I think.
Hi there, I'm Paul Anderson, Penrose. Many of the Tier 1 bidders are currently kind of doing rounds asking Tier 2s and 3s to register with them and expression of interest. If people kind of register with them and not register with the MOJ, will they still be covered by the ISPA?
I think the tier 1s need to be asked that question. If you're registering with them separately from the registration form, that is the first thing that I would ask them. The MOJ can't guarantee that because that's obviously out of their power. That's why they set up the system that they've got. So our advice would be, although it's irritating because the whole point of the registration process was that you wouldn't have to do this, please do make sure that you have done the registration form. Whatever you choose to sign on top of that with specific potential tier 1s is obviously a question for you and what sort of resource you can put into that, but please make sure you're registered.